which are not exactly going the way of the President Putin would have wanted it to. I suspect there will be domestic implications to whatever the peace agreement is going to be. I hope you're right, man, that it will be done in 2 weeks, because we are the entire world is suffering. But there will be a very big change, because the how do you say, the idea, I think some of the analysts would say, I don't know if you agree with this, is that President Putin is trying to reconstruct or recreate the Soviet Union under another name. So perhaps this was his move. Should he weaken as a political figure in his own country, in Russia, then certainly the policy, that policy of trying to gain territory through whatever means, as he says, because to provide for him a buffer to NATO, whatever the reason might truly be. I think that will have to be restudied by whoever will be most dominant in Russian domestic politics after Putin. So yes, I believe there will be a new world order, and I am certain that Tehran and Beijing are watching very, very closely what will happen to Ukraine. There will be a geopolitical balance of power. It also depends on what the reaction of the EU and the United States will be. I think the United States we can predict fairly accurately. EU is in a more difficult spot simply because they are highly dependent for their energy to Russia, and how they will balance that. I know that that the President Biden has just signed with the EU a deal to supply from the United States and from other countries 15 billion tons of gas, which will cover some of the needs of the EU. But again, that's not something that can instantly be made, to instantly be applied. There will be a transition period, because it is a very large economic infrastructure that has been developed for Europe to take advantage of the gas supplies out of Russia. These are all terribly large forces, and inevitably will change things.
Yeah, but it seems like you have a more future scenario in mind. But what I have used really is from a content analytical perspective, using events data analysis, meaning I'm paying attention to the verbs being used by the negotiators. And this is not Pollyannish, by the way, Mr. Marcos. It's just that I feel that Putin will not allow the conflict to spill over. It will encapsulate within the Ukraine conflict area. And that, yes, I still believe that within the next 2 weeks you have a peace agreement.
I sincerely hope so. Because misunderstandings, mistakes can occur. With Poland being right there on the border of Ukraine, we already have had reports of missiles that mistakenly flew into Poland. And these are the kind of things that we have to be very careful about. I think maybe that is one thing that they can agree upon, Russia and the West, as we refer to it often.
Mr. Marcos, earlier, I don't know if you were around already when I asked questions about the projected state visit of Vladimir Putin here in the Philippines. Because the third administration has only so many more breaths to take before the end of their regime, of their tenure. When you become president, will he honor that invitation that Duterte has given to him to do a state visit? Not just a visit, a state visit.
Well, certainly. Why not? We have diplomatic relations with Moscow. We should continue to honor that agreement that we have with Russia, and we must continue to again cultivate relationships that are beneficial to the country. And position very clear, that self-determination is an important principle as far as the Philippines is concerned. And in that context, then we can still speak on many other subjects with Russia.
Yeah, so that means you are not telegraphing something to the United States of America by welcoming Vladimir Putin in a state visit.
It need not be Russia or Vladimir Putin, any country. I think that would like to come and visit, and we would feel that there is something beneficial to be gained by furthering, strengthening relationships between our two countries is something that we should always be open to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Marcos. Good evening. Ang tanong ko po ay ito, ang nabanggit niyo po ang phrase na New World Order na sa tingin niyo ay maaaring mangyari pagkatapos ng peace treaty between Ukraine and Russia. And we see that the world will be restructured around a new framework or a new political order. So my question is this, I hope that you realize the burden or the special task that you have as a future chief architect of our foreign policy, because in the past drawing of world orders, the Philippines never played a role in determining its position in that world order. For example, between the wars of Spain and the United States, it's the United States that defined our position in that new world order. When the United Nations was instituted after post-World War II, we were still at the coattails of the United States. But now we are an independent country. So my question is, when this new world order that you think could happen after a peace treaty gets concluded between Ukraine and Russia, how will you position our country in this new geopolitical order?
It very clearly will depend on what the exit strategy will be for the West, for EU, and for Putin in the peace agreement that we hope they will sign. What the nature of that agreement will be? Will it be status quo? The forces that are in Ukraine, the Russian forces that are, and Belarusian forces that are already in Ukraine, will they just stay where they are, status quo? Will they be told to withdraw? I only say that because it is very important to Putin's position domestically. He is in a very precarious place because it has not gone according to plan. I suspect that he was hoping that it would be a similar situation as it was in Crimea, where they pretty much just walked in, with very little resistance. But then they prepared Crimea for a long time. They were helping the rebel groups, the Russian-speaking groups, and they were developing them. And they built a corridor on the east side of Crimea, within which the Russians could cross the border very easily. That hasn't been the case in Ukraine. And so, depending on how it is viewed, the peace treaty that we hope will come, it depends on how it is viewed by the local domestic political scenarios in Russia itself. That, whatever the reaction will be to Putin, will fix one of the variables in the geopolitical new world order. So we still have to wait to see what happens. I'm sure China is waiting with bated breath to see what's going to happen here. Tehran, I'm sure, as the professor mentioned, is clearly a player in this regard. And in the Middle East, now, so far it has not affected the Middle East in any way, so far. But maybe if it works out for Russia, if it works out for Vladimir Putin, China might be emboldened to make their own moves. Tehran might be emboldened to make their own moves. On the other hand, if it is very much a rejection of the idea of Putin of taking over a country, then perhaps that will also influence their thinking as to what can and cannot be done for their own interests. So yes, I don't think we can predict very closely because we can't. I hope to be as optimistic as the professor, but I don't see it happening in 2 weeks, to be perfectly honest. I hope it is. I hope it does, because the economic effects on every single person in the world has been enormous. And it is going to be enormous for a good long while. It's not going to go away anytime soon.
Sir, since we have a mutual defense treaty with the United States, that would affect, and I'm sure that would play a role in how, our country would position ourselves in this new geopolitical world order. So my question is, to what extent will you allow the United States influence your actual decision making in how you're going to craft the future foreign policy of the Philippines when that new world order has already taken shape?
Well, we have a very special relationship with the United States, and it's something that we have had and developed over 100 years, starting from being essentially a colony to a very strong partner here, especially in this part of the world. In the
Paano kaya
region.
si Pacquiao pag
And
sasagot
that, I
dyan?
think has been a good thing for both countries, both for the United States and for the Philippines. And
Boboto pa naman si
it's still
Pacquiao?
depend on that. But the scenario that you spoke about, where we historically have always been with the United States, is still, I think, a carryover, a hangover of the Cold War. And we discussed it a little bit the last time. And I don't think the geopolitics of today are the same. And we now have to tread that very fine line to make sure that it's the Philippines, it's the Philippine interests that are the primacy of Philippine interests in anything. Now, in geopolitics, especially, we have another superpower 600 kilometers from our coastline, China. That puts, again, the Philippines in quite a precarious position. We're lucky because we're important geopolitically, even just strategically. We are unlucky because we are important geopolitically, and we've become a bit of a hot potato when it comes to that. So we definitely have to consider what is best always for the Philippines. And how do we achieve that? With our existing partnerships, alliances, as they stand now, with what will be a new world order. Will it be a very big change? Will it be a small, slight change? Will it be a big change for Russia and a small change for everybody else? There are many moving parts to this thing, and it's not something that is easily definable. But I think once the peace agreement is made, we will study it very, very closely, and we will ask our best experts to determine what is the effect in these other countries. What is the effect to Tehran, to Iran? What's the effect? How does it change their thinking in Beijing? How does it change the thinking in Washington, D.C.? These are the big players. These are the people we have to deal with. So yes, it's not. I wish I could give you a categorical answer, but until we know exactly what that peace treaty will contain, it's very difficult. And we know what will happen after that in Russia. How will the power structure change? Will there be? Will Putin be removed? Will he still
Tigil ko
maintain
na
his position?
para mag-ano siya,
All of these
mag-live
things
siya.
are
Oo, wala na.
going to play a part
Oh, sige.
in what it will
Balik
look
mo.
like after that peace agreement.
Senator, good evening. With this as a backdrop, the discussion with Russia and Ukraine, I was wondering if you can pivot to domestic concerns, particularly your energy policy.
Yeah.
Because as you said, the conflict is being felt worldwide. All of the things that we are seeing are sky-high fuel prices. But how would you address this? What would be your policies, particularly with energy security, going beyond this issue?
In the past week or so, since the war in Ukraine began, I have been espousing a policy of subsidizing all oil imports. Because the idea is that, yes, transport is the first sector that's going to be affected, but everyone will be affected. And therefore, if we're to support everyone, we have to subsidize all oil imports, in my view. However, I have been crunching the numbers. We can't do it. We cannot afford it. It's that simple. So we have to focus now. Now, maliwanag, yung mga transport group talagang naghihingalo dahil dito sa pagtaas ng presyo ng langis. Pero alam naman natin, pag tumaas ang presyo ng langis, sabay-sabay susunod na yung mga iba. So we have to focus in the sectors that will actually that will mitigate the effects of the oil price rise. Well, there still exists the option of perhaps giving a tax holiday on the excise taxes to the oil for the oil imports. However, the pandemic is not over. We do not know what is going to happen next. When each time we thought tapos na, it came back. And I'm sure all of us after Christmas, after the Omicron hit at the end of January, sabi natin siguro baka tapos nito, baka wala na. But then we hear news now about Korea, about China, about Hong Kong, that they're locking down again. So we need those funds. Well, the government doesn't need the funds, people need the funds. And so we will still have to continue to collect as much as we can in preparation for any possible occurrence in terms of the pandemic. Baka may bagong strain, baka may babalik. But I don't think we will ever return to a time of lockdown anymore.
Senator, just before we go into it, I was wondering if you can clarify your position on the oil price stabilization fund. You said there's been some talk in social media to report, and I don't know if you are. Of course, the appeal is that there will be subsidy when prices are high.
Yes.
But the downside is that prices will remain high because when global prices dip. And there's the argument, of course, that the market is always more efficient in determining prices. Could you clarify your position?
No, I think it is not to change the price of the oil, it's to change the rate of change. It is to try and mitigate the rate of change. So that, let's say, if the price increase is from Sunday to Monday, instead of increasing the full, let's say we're going to increase by, I don't know, 5 pesos, let's say. Instead of doing it all in one shot, we'll do it slowly because we have a stabilization fund. There is no way to bring the price of oil down from the Philippines. We are at the mercy of the oil producers. We in the Philippines, if I'm not mistaken, are 0.07% of the fossil fuel market. Therefore, have very little influence on pricing, and we produce very little in terms of oil production. Rampay is about they say will dry up in the next 2 or 3 years. So yes, it is a very, very big problem. But the OPSF that I proposed is really to lessen the impact, and instead of making the impact instantaneous, we will try to make it happen over a longer time to give businessmen, consumers more time to adjust and to plan for the new regime of oil prices and oil products that will come to the Philippines.
We'll have to take a short break for now. Yes. Yeah, unfortunately, I've become the symbol of the human time clock. But the panel will still have a lot of questions for you, Senator Marcos. Unfortunately, we have to interrupt for a short break. So to everyone watching, don't go away. The Deep Probe SMNI presidential interviews will be right back.